Alright, so we're going to review Parashat Vayera. In Parashat Vayera, the focus is on Avraham Avinu, but also on Yitzchak, on Isaac, his son. This is a time in world history when the nations of the world are being scattered all over the place. This is after Dora Palaga, after the generation that attempted to build the Tower of Babel, a large skyscraper. And in some ways, that was an act of rebellion against God, thinking that they can be safe and sound without having God in their life. In case there's ever another flood, in case there's ever a major disaster, we can all climb up this building and be safe from a future flood. And of course, God showed them that you cannot escape me. I am in charge, and if you don't have me in your life, then you won't be able to survive. So what happens, however, right after their attempt, the world is thrown into a sort of chaos, because humanity at that point, up until that point, was in some ways united because they spoke one language. And right after that, we have the Torah telling us that man's language became mixed up. And all of a sudden, and of course it took some time, people developed different languages. Some languages were closer to each other, and some languages were very, very different than others. Like you have Chinese, Aramaic, they have nothing in common apparently. So even though languages derive from one source, and I have a whole series of lectures about that, and how we can see that they derive from one source, there was originally one language, still in the end, they drifted apart very, very much, and some languages don't resemble at all, the original language. And because of that, there's very little intelligibility between languages that are far apart. Languages that are closer to each other could be intelligible. In other words, people can understand each other somewhat. What we call dialects, languages that are somewhat related to each other from the same family. But somehow the Torah is telling this to us. Don't think that this was just a natural development, even though partially languages did become different from each other as a result of geography. Even today we see that the accent of one area is different than the accent of another area, even though they're speaking the same language. But initially, what brought about the major differences in the language was from Shamayim. It was an act of heaven. That they became so different that they couldn't understand each other. And as our tradition teaches us, that is one of the reasons why they could not continue to build that Tower of Babel. They couldn't communicate. So what you have is a split, a tremendous split, where people move away from where the center of humanity was at one time, in the area of Mesopotamia, the Middle East, and they went all over the world. And as a result of going everywhere, you have different cultures, civilizations developing besides language. And if you look around, take a look at, for example, at Mexico. Mexico, which is a large country, people think they speak Spanish. Yes, that's the official language in Mexico, but there are many, many Indian languages, indigenous languages that are still spoken there. And many of them are not related to each other. You have the same occurring in India. So even though you have quite a few official languages, 14, 15 official languages, because they're spoken by so many people, you have many, many other minor languages spoken in that country. Same thing occurs in Russia, in China, in the Philippines, where you have quite a few languages. Now, how do they communicate? The government has established that there's one language that everyone should learn in school, and that's pretty much what they all do. So even though they speak their own language at home, they are able to communicate with each other from different parts of the country. If you're thinking about when will we have one language for the entire world once again, that's only when Mashiach will come. But anyway, Abraham, goes out on a very important mission to unite humanity, not with one language, but with one philosophy. That is what he tries to do. And what does he do? He teaches. He teaches people that the world stands on three pillars: on Torah, on the service of God, and on acts of kindness. And when I say Torah, I don't necessarily mean the Torah that we have. Torah means laws. You have to have law and order. And the laws that he's talking about are the 7 Noahide laws for the most part. He says, this is what humanity is all about. You want us to all live in harmony. You have to keep in mind that it's not just about the economy. Economics, of course, are important. It's not only about work, it's about working together, about cooperation. There's a lot into preserving a society, maintaining law and order. One of those important ideals is to have a set of laws established that people will abide by. As the Torah later on tells us, we have to have shoftim veshotrim. We have to have judges and we have to have police to enforce the law. So there's a need for that law, there's a need for the order, there's a need for the service of God to remind ourselves that we are accountable for our actions, that we are responsible for what we do, and acts of kindness, that we interact with each other in a fair way, that we don't only focus on ourselves. So all of this is being taught by Avraham Avinu, that this world is purposeful. God created it for a purpose. And this is what he expects of us, and this is for our own benefit if we want to continue to exist and to succeed. You see, if you look back at history, that many, many nations, empires were around for a little while, but then they disappeared. They're no longer around. Apparently, they did not do things right. So in order for society to coexist, in order for life to continue as it was intended, Abraham Avinu said, this is what God expects of you. Very simple. Now, what happened in reality is that even though Abraham Avinu went out of his way to teach this to people, this philosophy about life, he not only was not successful with too many people, he actually encountered opposition. People were against this, what he was teaching. And the reason for that is because a lot of people believed in the opposite philosophy than what he was teaching. Take care of yourself. This is all about themselves. Very selfish society that all they thought about was satisfying themselves. If that's the case, then what this brought about is a certain apathy or indifference, that people were no longer interested in the welfare of other beings, were not sensitive to them. They were not, or did not act, I should say, responsible individuals in society, where one looks out for another. That's what we expect. That's what we know as something to be normal. But there are many, many places in the world till this very day that not everybody thinks that that is something that we need to do. They tell you, mind your own business. Have you heard of that? That is very, very not fair. I mean, even though obviously we don't want to interfere in other people's lives, but to mind your own business basically means that you don't get involved at all. And that's not true. There are some times where you need to take action, you need to do something for someone else too, not just for yourself. If you recall, there was an incident in Las Vegas a couple of years ago where somebody shot at a lot of people. A lot of people got killed. And there was a police officer who was not in uniform, he was not on duty, who risked his life to protect, to help whoever he can to get out of the danger zone. He got killed himself. Why did he do this? So some will say, well, that's part of his training. He's trained to do that now. It's not just training. It's a lot more than that. It's called courage. It's called heroism. There are some people who act in a heroic way, who have the courage to do the right thing. So it's not just training. These are people who obviously are sensitive and care about other human beings. It's very simple. If he wouldn't care, he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't risk his life. There's a story of an officer who once met with a rabbi. talking about an important person, a captain. And the rabbi asked him, tell me, what do you do when you get home after you finish your work? Rabbi, when I come home, I'm no longer on duty. I take off my uniform, my hat, and I devote myself to my own personal needs. I'm no longer on duty, he says. And the rabbi says, oh, that's interesting, because by us, in Judaism, we're always on duty. No one can say when they're home, oh, I'm no longer on duty. I'm no longer responsible. There's nothing else I need to do. No, we're always on duty. Very, very big difference. So this is what Abraham Avinu encountered, different outlook, that some people did not see it as a need, as something important to look after someone else. Perhaps some of them, when they could, they did help. Some of them perhaps did do other good deeds to other people. It could be, but as a general philosophy, people did not ascribe too much importance to this, because they lived in a world that was more centered on themselves. What is there in this for myself? That is what happens in a lot of marriages too, where people sometimes get married and ask, what is there in this marriage for me, instead of what is there for us. They don't think in the plural sense, they think in an individual way, thinking about themselves and not thinking as a whole. What could my family perhaps get out of this? Imagine if a couple before they go ahead with their divorce realize that their children are going to be left pretty much on their own, orphans, because the father or the mother have issues between themselves. They're not considering the family. What will the consequences be for the family? Are you only thinking about yourself? So this is the type of outlook that we're talking about, an outlook that Abraham Avinu saw everywhere, that people did not focus on the whole, on the community. They were more focused on themselves. So as a result of this, you have a lot of apathy in society, lack of sensitivity, where people do not have any interest whatsoever to contribute towards the welfare of other people. Where do you see this? You see this in the animal world, wild animals. If you've ever seen different kinds of wild animals fight for a meal, right? You have, for example, a cheetah, fast animal. And the animal was able to grab some dinner. So as she's about to eat her dinner, you have hyenas who want to steal her dinner, take it for themselves. Do you think it would be possible for the two of them, the hyena and the cheetah, to eat together? Let's share, okay? It's not mine and it's not yours, let's share. No, they don't understand the concept of sharing. So that's what happens. Human beings can act like animals, or even worse than animals, if they don't understand the concept of sharing. There are other people here that are important too. So this is a part of the animal kingdom. It shouldn't be something that we see amongst human beings, but that's what happens when there's a lot of apathy and people don't care about the welfare of another human being. So Abraham Avinu teaches about chesed, about kindness. Kindness is something that has to be learned. Even though some people by nature are kind-hearted, that is only some. Otherwise, people by nature are selfish, somewhat. So you have to learn what it means to be kindness. And when the Torah in this week's Parasha describes to us Sdom va'Amorah, what happened there, that the whole place was turned over, why did they get such a terrible punishment? Because that was an extreme example of totally lack of regard for anyone, especially if you were not from their town. You were a stranger, you were not welcome there. An extreme example of selfishness, an extreme example of materialism. So you have the exact opposite. You have this incredible contrast between Abraham, who represents the pillar of kindness, the epitome of kindness, and you have this area of Sdom va'Amorah that was exactly the opposite. And it doesn't stop there. Throughout our history, if you read about different cultures, you will find that there were some cultures that were into human sacrifice. There were some cultures who were into cannibalism, to eat other human beings. How did they ever get to that? Whether it's human sacrifice or whether it's cannibalism, all of that is cruelty. There's cruelty behind this. People who are kind-hearted, people who are sensitive, would never think of doing something like that. They would never come to this. So you have philosophies, cultures, religions that espouse this kind of way of thinking. And it's all cruel. No mercy, no kindness whatsoever. Now you can partially understand why the last test that Abraham Avinu had in this week's Parasha, the test of the Akedah, where he's instructed to bring Yitzchak on the Akedah as a sacrifice, why it was a real difficult test for him. This went against what he was preaching. He preached against human sacrifice. This is wrong. This is terrible. This is cruel. And obviously they didn't listen to him. So this was difficult for Avraham Avinu. But why did Hashem make him go through this? Various explanations. One of them is to show everyone, don't think that when Avraham Avinu did what he did it because that was his nature. He was a sensitive man, he was kind, so it came naturally to him. No. Nothing of this sort, to bring your son as a sacrifice, would come naturally to somebody like Avraham Avinu. He was only going to do it because Hashem told him to do so. It was a test. Obviously Hashem never meant for him to bring a human sacrifice. So from this we see that this was not his nature. That whatever else he did, his kindness is not because he was just kind by nature. Don't just say, well, it's easy for him because he was that way by nature. No, not necessarily. There was a lot of things that were not easy for him to do. He did so only because Hashem instructed him. It was because of his love for Hashem, his understanding that God exists. Of course, he had clarity in that of course he was able to follow instructions blindly. So don't say it's his nature, therefore it was easy for him. No, it wasn't easy necessarily. You see another example of how it was difficult for him to have guests after he circumcised himself. And the Torah says that Hashem made that day a very hot day, so no one should bother him. Visitors. Still, he stood outside waiting for passerbys. He wanted very much to help. He wanted very much to do whatever he can for people who needed a drink, a place to sleep, something to eat. He cared very much about this mitzvah, even though it was kechom hayom, it was very hot, it was difficult, and he was in pain. So the Torah gives us another example of, you see how Abraham Avinu was a ish chesed, he was kind, even when it was painful, difficult. That is true chesed. Chesed is not only when it's easy for you, when you're in the mood, even when it's painful, when it's difficult. I want to share with you a story of an example of what real chesed is. As I said before, it's something that one needs to learn because it would not come naturally to us. We wouldn't think that way. We have to learn the halachot. We have to know how to do chesed. There was a couple who was traveling. In those days, they traveled by horse and buggy. And just like today we have a flat tire, in those days what would happen sometimes is that a wheel would break, and that took time to repair. Or a horse would die. This would happen. And this was on a Friday when one of the wheels broke. So they realized they would not have time to repair it before Shabbat. So what are they going to do? They had to be somewhere for Shabbat. The only place where they can spend Shabbat was in this hotel. It was a kosher hotel. It was owned by a Jew. So they were lucky at least that they could be in a place where they could have their meals. So they asked the owner, can we stay for Shabbat? He says, yes. What is the price? And the owner quoted a very high price. Psst, so expensive, they said. The owner says, yes, it's very expensive, but you know what? You can eat all you can. You know, you've seen these kind of menus in some restaurants. Eat all you can. For the price that you pay, eat as much as you want. So the couple said to each other, okay, it's much more than what we were prepared to spend, but at the very least, we're going to enjoy ourselves. We're going to eat as much as we want. Okay, after Shabbat is over, they say thank you to the owner, to the host, and they come to pay their bill. And the owner says, I'm not taking a penny from you. You're not taking a penny from us? No. I only meant to do chesed with you. I wanted to be kind to you. Then why did you quote such a high price? Had I told you it's for free, had I told you that it's chesed, you would never have wanted to stay. You would have felt uncomfortable. Perhaps you wouldn't have eaten as much. Because this is a favor I'm doing to you. Now that I told you that it costs a lot of money, at the very least, you enjoyed yourself. You made sure to eat as much as you can so you get your money's worth. That's what I wanted. I wanted you to enjoy yourself to the maximum. So I quoted the high price. I never intended to take a penny from you. This is my mitzvah. This is chesed. Chesed amiti, true chesed. He doesn't have to do it. He can quote a small price, something. I mean, he has expenses here. No, he wanted to do an act of chesed. He did it in a very smart way. They shouldn't feel bad. They should feel good about it. They're spending. Anyway, since chesed is so important, we need to know how to develop this act of kindness. The act of kindness doesn't come easy to a lot of people. But we're not going to go into all that is necessary to describe the importance of chesed and how one goes about it, because we don't have the time now. But what I'll do is I'll cover 3 ideas that are necessary. 3 ideas that are very much important in order for one not to have a difficulty with kindness. In other words, I'm assuming that people understand that it's important and that it's a mitzvah. Okay? But, as I've said many times before, in Spanish we say, de dicho a hecho hay mucho trecho. From saying to doing, there's a long road. So a lot of people may know the importance of something, they learned about it, but to actually practice it becomes very difficult to them. They'd rather not have a guest. They don't want to work hard, even though this person may need a meal. A lot of people don't go over to someone who they see in the synagogue who's from out of town. Do you have a place where to eat or to stay? They avoid them. Not too good. That's very, very bad. And that's something that we need to be reminded from time to time, because maybe we are sometimes unaware that people have some need and they're embarrassed to ask. So if we notice somebody who's a stranger, who needs some help, we have to offer them help. Whatever we can do. If we can't do it, perhaps we can set him up with someone else. All of that is a form of chesed called achnasat orchim, where people have guests over. Chesed just doesn't mean to do a favor. There's all kinds of favors. So some people have it easy lending money, perhaps giving money, but to have somebody over their home, they're afraid. We don't know who this guy is. Well, obviously you have to be careful who you bring into your home. But we can't forget that this is a big mitzvah. And Avraham Avinu is an example of this. Still, in order that we perfect ourselves in this area, we have to be aware of the following 3 ideas. Idea number 1. Person may have the potential and the knowledge of doing chesed, but if he's lazy, he will not accomplish a lot in life. Laziness is a very terrible characteristic. Solomon, Shlomo Melech, in his book Mishlei, Proverbs, talks a lot about it, how the lazy man loses out a lot in life. Now you can imagine, here we're talking about losing out in life, the more so when it comes to spiritual accomplishments, which are more difficult. And he goes on to describe, you want to see a lazy man's house, you can see by his fence, you can see by his garden, the fence made out of stone is falling apart, and his garden is full of weeds. It's not kept up. You can see that this man is lazy. So lazy people don't accomplish a lot. So here we're telling someone, be kind to others. If he's going to be lazy, it's going to be very difficult for him to develop kindness properly. Avraham Avinu comes to the rescue and teaches us it's not just about kindness, it's about being zariz. We see by Avraham Avinu that he was diligent. Zarizut means diligence. He was quick to act. So he tells them, it's not enough that you understand the importance of chesed. If you're not going to do it bizrizut, if you're not going to act quickly, you may lose the opportunity. The guy may no longer be there. Therefore, be careful not to delay, postpone. Come back tomorrow. Maybe he won't come back. Maybe tomorrow you won't be able to. You've lost a chance to do a mitzvah. So in order to overcome that laziness that makes chesed more difficult, we need to develop zrizut, to always act quickly, timely, and not push it off. Otherwise, the chesed will come about very difficult. Another important idea is humbleness. Avraham Avinu expresses, Anochi afar va'efer. I'm like dust and ash. He doesn't consider himself important. He doesn't consider himself someone that deserves credit for anything. That's a very interesting expression. Afar va'efer, meaning I'm very, very low. I'm nothing. This is the exact opposite of somebody who is selfish. Because why is he selfish? Because he considers himself more important than other people. How is being so humble important in doing chesed? In order to succeed in doing chesed with everyone, you have to be patient and tolerant. Midat hasavlanut ve'asovlanut, we call it in Hebrew. Patient and tolerant. Yes, you will find and will meet some very difficult people that you'd rather not deal with. Very challenging situations. People who may not have taken a shower for a while. And you're needing to deal with this because you're facing him or her. What do you do now? Oh, I don't do chesed with you. Only with clean people. People that smell good. You can't discriminate. Chesed does not discriminate. Someone is in need. So you need tolerance. You need patience. A person who's not humble cannot be really tolerant or patient with other people. We're talking about especially difficult situations. Moshe Rabbeinu is another example of humbleness. V'nachnu ma, he says, who are we? We don't think of ourselves. He was being accused of perhaps showing favoritism to his family by appointing members of his family for the high positions. No, who are we? We're nothing. We don't hold of ourselves. We were told by God to do this. We were appointed by Him. It's not that we chose it, that we won it. So you see the importance of this midah called anava, humbleness, as being very, very significant if one wants to develop that connection with others, with God, of course. Without humbleness, the person will be too immersed in his own pursuit of his own, of what will bring him pleasure, what will satisfy him, and he won't consider the needs of others. Look at Avraham Avinu in another way. As a result of his kindness, sensitivity, humbleness, he was also prepared to pray for the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. He tells God, there might be some righteous people there. Look how much he cares. You know that place is corrupt. You know that they are sinful. Why are you getting involved? Why do you pray? Why do you ask? Yes, because he was a very sensitive person. And he realizes that prayer is powerful. He realizes that prayer can save the day. He knows that it's important to care about other people. Perhaps he's saying, God, give them a chance. And of course, God says, I've already given them many, many chances. But what's interesting about that whole conversation that the two of them had was that Hashem is actually telling Abraham, this is what I'm about to do. Why tell him? Just go ahead and destroy them without telling him. So even though the Torah is telling us that Abraham is going to be the owner of the land, he needs to know what's going to happen in his own backyard, which is why Hashem shares that information with him. He should know what's going on there. Perhaps the deeper meaning here is, the deeper concept, is that Avraham Avinu is given a chance to try to do what he always does, and that is to help people. He's given the chance here, even though Hashem says, you know what, with all due respect, I know you care, but here it won't work. They have no chance. It's a done deal. Because they were so evil. So we see the efforts at the very least. We see a little bit, we learn a lot about Avraham Avinu. We see what kind of a character he had. Maaseh Avot Siman Lemanim, the rabbis tell us. When we see the deeds of our forefathers, this should be a lesson for us. This is how we need to do it. So we see many, many examples of Avraham Avinu's kindness, sensitivity, and humbleness. So what we've seen so far are two important ideas that will help someone develop that kindness. Number one, that he's not lazy, that he's diligent. This will help him carry out his good intentions. Number two, that he's humble. The humbleness will help him be considerate of even those people who may be very difficult. And we all encounter that in our life at some point. And how do you deal with them unless you have some patience and tolerance? And number three is the most important of all. Without number three, nobody can ever last too long in doing anything good, because there will be all kinds of situations that will be very, very demanding of us. And if we don't have number three, it will be very, very difficult. In order to understand number three, I'm going to give you a little introduction. Let's say you're looking for a loan to buy a house. You go to a lender. What is the lender going to consider if he gives you a loan or not? Three things. Definitely, he's going to look at the income. Definitely, he's going to look at the value, the appraised value of the real estate. But many brokers will tell you one of the most important, if not the most important criteria for giving the loan is the credit report. You've heard of that, no? If a person doesn't have good credit, even if he has tons of money, even if the house is worth a lot of money, so you say, good, it's good collateral, they won't give you the loan, especially not today. In the olden days, years ago, banks worked a little bit differently. They don't want to foreclose. So even if you have a great job, you have money, real estate, whatever it is, if the credit report is no good, they won't give you the loan. If you have a great credit report, but not such a big down payment, or it's a little bit difficult for you with the payments, they might give you a different kind of a loan. I mean, they'll consider giving you the loan, but the conditions might be slightly different. Credit report is number one. If you recall the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, there were a lot of people who owned real estate who gave up their real estate because the loan on the real estate was more than what it was worth. Remember those days? Somebody asked me, Rabbi, what do you think? I have this situation right now. This building, he says, is not worth so much. I owe on this building much more than what I can sell it for. So perhaps I should just let it go. I said, don't do that. You're going to ruin your credit. It's not worth to ruin your credit. Wait, things will change. Of course, as we all know, things changed. And today things are a lot different than they were back then. But look how people were prepared to give up. They don't realize that by giving up, they were also ruining their credit. And credit is very, very important. Later on, I'm sure some people regretted that what they did. It ruined their credit. So, what's the credit report in this week's Parasha? The credit report is given at the end of the Parasha to Avraham Avinu, who is told by God himself, Ata yadati ki yireh Elokim ata. Now I know that you're God-fearing. God-fearing, to say that about an individual, means that he has the highest credit by God. You are God-fearing. Why is that title so important? It means God says, I can rely on you, I can trust you. Same thing with Moshe, Eved Ne'eman, trustworthy servant. as I've said in another lecture, and this is an important quality in marriages too, in relationships, trust. If you don't have trust, then you're going to have a very, very hard time. When you read about Avraham Avinu, when he was traveling or moving, going from place to place, one of his concerns was exactly that. Perhaps there's no fear of God in this place. That's what he had to say about his wife, Sarah. Oh, she's my sister. Otherwise, they would have killed him to take his wife. People were capable of doing that. Why? Because there's no Yirat Elokim. If there's no fear of God, people are capable of doing all kinds of things. So Avraham Avinu is concerned about that, rightfully so. Now I have some news to tell you. One who is not involved in chesed, in acts of kindness, he never does acts of kindness to others, cannot possibly be a God-fearing person. As the rabbis tell us, because God says, if you don't like my kids, then you don't like me. You hear that? Very important idea here. If you don't like my kids, you don't like human beings, those that I created, then you don't like me. It's not possible for one to love God and to hate any of his creatures, to hate them. That's not possible. It doesn't go together. You cannot love me if you don't like my kids. In Sdom, therefore, you have an excellent example of where individuals living there were totally far from being God-fearing because they were very, very selfish, cruel, and sinful. So you can see from their behavior, from the way the Torah describes their behavior, that they were far from being God-fearing. No God in their life whatsoever. And that is why they did all these despicable things that we can't even imagine what they did. Anyway, rabbis remind us that be careful when dealing with politicians. Sometimes we think that we may want to ask them for a favor because they're in the position to help us. Most politicians will not help you. On the contrary, they want you to help them. They're more into themselves. If they're not God-fearing and really care about what is emet, what is the truth, they're not going to help you in your time of need. Once you get them elected, they'll forget about you. So the rabbis tell us, don't put your hope high on these individuals, especially if they're not God-fearing, because you won't see chesed from them. Because they have to do something for you that will interfere what they're trying to accomplish, which is maintain power, then they won't do it. So don't trust them, don't rely on them, don't ask them for favors. Don't think that they will be out there to help you whenever you need them. So now comes my question. Since Yirat Elokim is important, why perhaps can't we say that it's enough for somebody to just have midot tovot, to have good character, good nature? Yes, Yirat Elokim, the fear of God, is definitely important. It can make a difference, but perhaps somebody can get away with it, in other words, if he has just a good nature. Why wouldn't that be sufficient? This man I can trust, you know what? He has, as they say in English, a sterling character. You've heard of that? Good character. Why isn't that enough? Rabbis tell us something incredible. Imen Torah en derech eretz. If there's no Torah, then there's no proper conduct. How could that be? We know, all of us, we know people who don't have Torah. They're not even Jewish, and they have very good character, good conduct. So what did the rabbis mean that if there's no Torah, there's no derech eretz? What they meant is that there's no guarantee. And I'm going to explain this. Because this is the same idea with Yirat Shamayim, with Yirat Elokim. There is a Mishnah in the Talmud that says as follows. If you own animals, you're responsible. They can do damage. They can hurt people. But some domesticated animals, you don't have to worry too much that they're going to hurt someone or cause too much damage because they're domesticated. It can happen. If it happens several times, then there's a tendency. The tendency is called mu'ad. This animal is mu'ad. He has a tendency to gore a bull. Oh, he has a tendency, then you have to put a lock on the gate. You have to watch over him, because if he goes out and hurts someone, does damages, you're responsible 100%. If it happened that when he was not a mu'ad, when he did not have this tendency, it was a freak accident, then you pay 50% damages. In other words, there are rules on how much damages one has to pay, depending on if it's really his fault or not. What will determine if it's his fault? If you know that this animal has a record of hurting, of goring. Comes along the Mishnah and tells us like this. However, if you have the following wild animals as a pet in your home, then you're always going to be 100% responsible. A wolf, a leopard, and when we say leopard, we mean a tiger too, or anything like that. A bear, a lion, of course, a hyena, and a snake. These animals, which may be your pet, which you may have trained, they are mu'adim le'olam, they're always going to be mu'ad. Mu'ad meaning they will have a tendency to possibly react with their wild nature. So even though you've kept them as pet, even though you've trained them, all you have done is train but not tame. There's a difference between training and taming. You cannot completely tame a real wild animal. So the Mishnah gave us a list of animals that can always happen, turn against even their owner. And you've heard stories like that, I'm sure. Even against their owner. There have been lions, there have been bears that have turned against their own owner. So therefore, if you keep them, just remember, you're completely responsible if they cause any harm. The same is true with human beings. There might be a lot of human beings out there that have good character, perhaps even a good education. But is there any guarantee that the character they have and the education will always be there to protect them from doing any harm to another human being? What if one day they become very, very upset and they want to take revenge? What's going to hold them back? It doesn't have to be revenge. It could be, he's very, very angry and upset and he reacts in a very, very bad way. He didn't have time to think about it. It could happen. Reactions. Good character is nice, but it's not a guarantee in itself that it will be enough to hold somebody back from doing something wrong or to get him to do something good. People are under pressure. Perhaps they're not going to do the right thing. But they have good character, but so what? They're under pressure. Yirat Elokim, fear of God, means I'm not going to do this. This is against everything I believe in. If necessary, I will die and not do this. So the only thing that can anchor down, hold somebody back, control the human being from doing something that is totally wrong is the fear of heaven. Only that. Nothing else. That is why Yirat Elokim is so important. Good character is very special, but by itself it may not always be enough. You need therefore Yirat Elokim. I'll give you another example of why it's important to learn Torah and to have Yirat Elokim. Imagine the following. You have people in this world that are very, very strict. Okay? You have other people who are very, very giving. Two opposites. Strict meaning that they're very, very kapdamim, very demanding, not nice. I'm not talking about selfish people right now. I'm talking about people who are just very, very strict. And these two characteristics are similar to what Hashem has in the world. Hashem has two attributes of His that manage the world. He has various attributes, but two very, very distinct ones called Din and Rachamim. You've heard of them? Justice and mercy. So what's justice? It's strict. No mercy. No flexibility. This is the way it needs to be. And then there's Rachamim, mercy. Now, in the same way that Hashem has these attributes in the world, and that's how He runs the world, there are people like that too. Some people are pure din, strict, no flexibility. This is the way it needs to be. And some people are rachamim. All right. Are any of them always good? No. You might say, well, what's wrong with rachamim? Rachamim is no good because when it comes, for example, to the mitzvah of tzedakah, beautiful mitzvah, tzedakah, charity, would you give charity to someone that you know is going to use that money to buy drugs? He's an addict. And he's going to use that money to buy more drugs. Would you give him? I hope not. But the person who has rachamim is very, very merciful and compassionate. He sees this guy, and he knows that what he's going to do, he may give him, because he feels bad for him. You have to be careful with who you give tzedakah. That is why the word tzedakah comes from the root tzedek, just. It has to be for the just thing, for the right thing. Even when you're doing something so special and correct and good called tzedakah, you still have to know to who and how much. Perhaps this cause deserves more than this cause. Yes. Yeah, there's different causes. They're not all the same. Perhaps this guy doesn't deserve it at all. You're ruining it. You're making it bad for him if you give him the money. He might need something else, not money. So therefore, in those kinds of situations, we need Torah, we need guidance, we need Yirat Elokim. Otherwise, if we just follow our nature by itself, that nature may be not 100% accurate. In other words, it may not be the best judge as to what is the correct thing to do. We need guidance. So that is what Torah is all about. Torah gives us instruction, and it gives us guidance. Tzedek, justice, becomes a lot clearer to us what is the correct thing to do, what is the right thing to do, when we have the emet. When a person has the emet, when he knows somewhat what the purpose of life is, what God expects of us, what is right and what is wrong. That is when tzedek takes on a different meaning. Otherwise, everybody might say, each to his own. What do you mean, each to his own? There's only one truth. But people have a difficult time. That's what happens today in the courts. You have liberals, you have conservatives, different kinds of judges, even though that's human nature that some are going to be more liberal or conservative. But there's only one truth, there's only one constitution in this country. But how are they going to interpret that constitution? Sometimes what you have is a judge. Now you think that this judge is not corruptible. Yes, a judge who's biased, who has these ideas of how things should be. And that's very, very sad. If there's no Yirat Elokim, if there's no 100% emet, people will not have the clarity of judging properly in any case. Yes, some cases are difficult and it takes a lot of analysis and thinking, and it's not easy. What was the intent of the fathers of the Constitution? But even if the intent was what they think it was, there may be a need to amend it. There may be a need to change it if the situation calls for it. For that, you need tzedek, you need emet, you need Yirat Elokim. Without that, people are not, going to consider doing anything that will be too much of a change, of a radical change. Why do it? What do you mean, why do it? There's a great need for it. So, emet will bring us clarity, the clarity that we need to understand what should be done, what is right and what is wrong. Last but not least, Yirat Elokim is important for the following reason. The rabbis tell us, Akol bidei shamayim chutz miyirat shamayim. Everything is in the hand of heaven except for the fear of heaven. As the rabbis tell us in the Gemara, the fear of heaven is God's treasure. That is what He keeps in His treasure. What do you mean that's what He's doing? Yes, because that is something that God did not give us. We developed it. He gives us everything, but He left us free will, where we act, where we make decisions, where we decide what we want to be. We want to do the right thing, or God forbid, the wrong thing. What will determine whether we do this or that? Yirat Elokim, does one really have the fear of heaven or not? Fear of heaven is the ultimate decision that human beings are asked to make. It's not dictated by one's mazal. People are born pretty much the same, with a blank mind, without yirat Elokim, even though, of course, it helps to have good parents, it helps to have a good education, the good genes, all of that is very, very helpful. But you've had cases where kids who misbehaved were born to good parents, good families. How did they come to this? How did they become criminals? There's various explanations for this. But it all has to do with free will. Nobody should therefore ever say, if he's doing something wrong, this is the way I was born, this is the way I am. You could change if you had yirat Elokim. So the trick to get people to change is, number one, to develop yirat Elokim, the fear of heaven. Otherwise, what happens is that you can have many logical arguments with people about whether something is right or wrong. Abortion, big topic. Even though there's a lot of details of when yes, when not, how, and so forth, there's no doubt in the world that if people do not have yirat Elokim, it's going to be tougher for them to figure this one out. They're going to rely on their nature, or their way of thinking, their philosophy. If one has yirat Elokim, then he's going to think differently. God doesn't want this. God won't allow for something like this. So before we argue with people, the best thing to ask them is, do you have the fear of heaven? Do you believe in God? If that does not exist, your arguments with them will be very, very difficult. You won't get too far, because their way of thinking will not be based on yirat Elokim. It will be based on their upbringing, their nature, their surroundings, or whatever is convenient. And that's, of course, not necessarily the truth. Therefore, always determine whether a person who you're discussing something with, does he first have it very, very clear that God created this world and expects of us certain things. If that is very, very clear to the person, there's no doubts or any hesitations about it, then there's a chance that you can convince him, or he can convince himself of the truth of something. That's what we mean by yirat Elokim, that it's completely up to us. And what happened in the last test of Avraham Avinu, the test of the Akedah, is that both Abraham and Yitzchak not only demonstrated their love for Hashem, they demonstrated that with fear of heaven, one is capable to even give his life for what he believes in. So even though we've said before that a lot of people can do chesed perhaps, if they're humble, they're not lazy, they can do good deeds if they have it by nature. All of that is fine, but are they prepared to give their life for this? Not necessarily. Yirat Elokim is the key to be able to give your life, if necessary, as it was during our history. Many times when a Jew was told, you better convert, otherwise you'll be put to death. It was only because of their fear of heaven and the clarity of the truth that did not allow them to give in to the demands of the enemy. It's all yirat Elokim. Those who had a strong fear of heaven never gave in. And last but not least, they did us a favor, Abraham and Yitzhak, through that Maaseh Akedah. Through that challenge, they instilled in our neshama, in the soul of all the Jews, for future generations, that ability to be able to go al Kiddush Hashem, to be able to sanctify God's name. So the Maaseh Akedah was not only a test. People think, oh, it was a test for Abraham. Yes, but it was more than that. It was through that test that was necessary, because God implanted in the Jewish soul, through that test, that ability, because He knew that in the future we will have these kind of situations. We will be challenged. We will be tested. Where will we get the strength and the courage and the clarity to not give in? Hashem implanted it through that Akedah in our soul, that we should have that power, that courage, that strength to give our lives as necessary for Hashem's sake. Amen.